And we felt, particularly as Black women and as women of color, we were the least resourced, right? I'd look around and see like, my budget's real small compared to that budget, right? That turned into a conversation. We're like, what would it look like if we were to build a space that honored what we feel like we need, right? Where we invested in the ways that people haven't invested in us.
Welcome to Rapid Wednesday, a conversation series where we celebrate female entrepreneurs and their inspiring stories. I'm Paola, founder of Fanm Djanm. We make beautiful head wraps and hair accessories for every occasion and everybody. Each month, we sit down with an incredible woman from our community and we talk about their work, their passions, and what drives them. Join us as we connect and uplift each other.
Welcome to Rapid Wednesday. I am delighted to welcome my friend, Virginia Cumberbatch, who is, I like to refer to as Austin royalty. I don't know if you like this, but you're an activist, you are a writer, you are a speaker, and you're the co-founder of Rosa Rebellion. Oh. Yes, so please introduce yourself as Virginia and tell us more about your work and what you do.
Well, first of all, this is such a treat. I mean, I feel very honored to be wrapped by Paola and just be in this beautiful community space that you've built. It's truly an honor, and I've been really grateful to get to know you as a friend, but also as a community partner, and so I'm really grateful to be in conversation with you today. I'm Virginia. I am a native Austinite, which these days is very rare because people are moving in and out of this city so quickly, and so, but even more rare to be a Black native Austinite. So I like to say that I'm a Black unicorn. Take a photo, tell a friend we do exist, post this on Instagram. And I think, honestly, growing up, being reared here in Austin very much informed the lens in which I do the work that I do today. Growing up as a brown Black girl in a mostly white city, particularly in the 90s, it's interesting, people are like, oh my gosh, comparing Austin to these other metro cities that are around our size, and they're saying, there's a lack of melanin, there's a lack of cultural vitality that's been built innately for us. I'm like, well, you should have seen it like in 1997. We've come a long way. But that very much sort of literally and figuratively colored my lens. I had a clear understanding, even if I didn't have the language growing up, of what it meant to navigate spaces that weren't built for me, right? And what it means to traverse conversations of race in space, particularly in a city like Austin, where, we kind of have this this narrative of being like very progressive and very liberal and keep Austin weird and we're innovative and creative, but those sort of monikers don't necessarily align with everybody's lived experience here. And so born and raised here, but me and my siblings are the only native Texans on both sides of our families who are the weirdos. My dad's family's from New York City by way of Barbados, and my mom's family is mostly in LA. And so very different environments to also be exposed to. And then we all made our way up to New England for college. And then eventually I came back, and that's when I really, I'd acquired the language, the history. I was a history major and a sociology major, and always considered myself a storyteller, and really loved the way in which the practice of documenting untold stories was in itself a tool of both healing and sometimes disruption. And so that's ultimately what I pursued, was how can I use the art of storytelling as this way of telling new stories and telling illuminating stories that move us to a more equitable future. And so I did that work for in various facets, on boards and organizations, and then after grad school found myself running the Center for Community Engagement and the Social Justice Institute at the University of Texas for about 5 years, which inspired my first book, which was about the story of integration at the University of Texas, which had largely not been told. And then from there, recognizing at the end of the day, UT was a state institution in the state of Texas, and there was only so much I could do there for an institution that maybe didn't care as much about these conversations as it said it did. And so that's when Megan Harding and I co-founded the brand Rosa Rebellion. And one, I just want to thank you. You've been such a wonderful supporter, both you know, around our programming, but also just sort of a visible presence. And it's been so wonderful to have that type of support. But we launched in 2019 at South by, and we are a platform for creative activism by and for women of color. And we see the necessity to disrupt and dismantle systemic oppression, utilizing our creative resources. And that a lot of times is through the art of storytelling. And so here we are almost 4.5 years later, which, you know, doesn't seem like it because most of that was a pandemic.
Right.
But we couldn't have imagined the timing of when we launched Rosa Rebellion and then what we now know as a very short-lived urgency from around the country and world where people were centering these conversations of equity and racial justice. And so it really put us in a position that we felt prepared to respond to that moment that we hope is movement moving forward.
Yes.
And so yeah, here we are sort of driving programming that we hope are speaking to the needs specifically of women of color who we know are oftentimes silenced and siloed. And I think that's why, you know, I'm such a fan of Fanm Djanm because you know, I just love your mission. You know, we talked about this when I interviewed you for an article about, you know, yes, it's a head wrap, yes, it's clothing, but it's an articulation of something deeper. And I love that your mission statement, right, is, you know, the translation of Fanm Djanm is strong woman. And you know, it's just such a beautiful thing when we can collaborate with folks who are like-minded.
Yes. Okay, so I want to go back. You've said a lot, and I love it. I love how you took us through your journey to what you're doing right now. And you mentioned the other co-founder. How did you meet?
Yeah. So I hope she never sees this video because we have a mutual friend who loves to take credit. Like literally we had this massive South by launch. And in the middle of us like sharing in front of all these people, she stands up and just like, I'd like to, my like formal thank you for meeting, you know, sort of introducing y'all. And Rosa Rebellion wouldn't happen without me. Like she really takes that much credit. And we're like, calm down, calm down. But truly, she is sort of the impetus. So we have a mutual, like one of our best friends, they went to college together at UT. And I met her when I moved back from Massachusetts. And then this friend moved to Kansas City. And so she says it's the absence of her that brought us together. Very dramatic woman.
Right.
Shout out to Tamara. And she's not wrong. But really it was, you know, Megan and I have such similar sort of postures in the world. We're empaths, but we just have this connectivity around how we want to, how we see ourselves kind of serving as advocates and elevating and amplifying voices. And we were doing it in very different spaces, right? I was doing it at an institution of higher learning, right? What was kind of trying to repair, or I don't think repair is the right word if you never did it. They were trying to build relationships with community. And Megan is a civil rights attorney, so she was doing that through the infrastructure of the legal system. And, you know, it started off as just kind of some venting sessions. We would literally meet for coffee at 7 a.m. Shout out to Figure 8 on East 12th. And we meet at 7 before work and just kind of talk about the despair of the world, you know, light stuff for the early morning. And just, but multiple levels of frustration, right? That we were both being tasked to work inside these systems that were never built to honor us, and then being asked on behalf of these institutions and systems to do the work of repair, right? So it's this dual task of exhaustion because you're having to navigate the space yourself, but then also do the work of dismantling it. And so there was that piece of it that was exhausting and was frustrating. And then the second layer was that we saw ourselves doing this in more creative ways. Like, you know, I went to school for public policy, but policy is not the only tool for disruption, right? And we felt we were constantly being told that's not how you do it, right? Or could you do it like this? And we're like, well, here we are 400 years later and it's not working. So maybe we should try something else. And we felt, particularly as Black women and as women of color, we were the least resourced, right? I'd look around and see like, my budget's real small compared to that budget, right? I just have to make do with graduate students, not make do, they're shout out to graduate students, and we have some in the audience. They're amazing, right? But they have limited capacity and limited access. And so that turned into a conversation. We're like, what would it look like if we were to build a space that honored what we feel like we need, right? Where we invested in the ways that people haven't invested in us. And so I had, for like years, had this name, Rosa Rebellion, in my head. I had just like, I take notes on my phone. Never knew what it was going to be used for, but I love alliteration, and I thought it was a cool name. And I always loved that, shout out to, the subpar history of America, or documentation history. We really know of Rosa Parks as this tired woman who sat on a bus. But this woman had like 40 plus years after of activism and disruption that most people don't know. And so I loved this idea of kind of like a spin on that legacy, where it's like the invisible labor of hers that actually had all this impact, and what would it look like to like continue that type of rebellion. And like a great co-founder and friend, I said the name to her, and she literally steals my laptop from across the coffee table. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I don't know you like that. Like, chill. And goes to like GoDaddy.com and buys all the domains for Rosa Rebellion. She's like, I don't know what you're gonna do with it. I don't know what the vision is, but I know you need to hold on to the name. And then we just kept meeting for coffee every morning and like started putting structure to it. And we're like, well, what would it look like? What would we need? And the vision for our first program was something Megan had been meditating on, which was, this was 2 or 3 years after like Ferguson, Mike Brown being killed, Trayvon Martin being killed. And we were seeing all of these activists that were on the front lines just be depleted. I think at this point we've lost like 3 or 4 activists, like they've taken their lives. Erica Gardner, the daughter of Eric Gardner, died of a heart attack at 29, right? And we realized like the exhaustive force of racial trauma, and that how do we maintain this work and movement if we're not investing in the people on the front lines? And so that's what birthed our first program. So to answer your actual question, what brought us together was a mutual friend, but I would say more than that, what brought us together was a collective care for community and collective care for women that looked like us. Because we would have been connected and worked together in some capacity without Tamara's help, because we ended up sitting on boards and stuff together. But I think what's really beautiful is that it wasn't just a working relationship, there was a friendship that was birthed there as well.
Rosa Rebellion has had so many wonderful programs and opportunities for creatives of color. Can you tell us a bit more about the different programs that you've created?
So, as I shared before, our first program it's called Rebel and Rest, and we really launched that because we said, if there's going to be a value set throughout all of our work and programming, it's going to be the need to rest in the midst of our resistance, right? Because if we are not whole, then we can't honor the sustained sort of work. And a lot of that was a sensibility of we both experienced burnt out one way or the other. And then I think just also even the language of like racial trauma isn't something that I'm sure many of us had a true understanding of what that meant holistically, and probably weren't introduced to until way into our adulthood, right? So for many of us as people of color navigating this country, right, we just know it to be a natural state of being, like microaggressions, cool, overt racism, cool, dismissal of our lived experience, cool. You're like, that's just how life is for us in this space. But having language to that is like really powerful, because it acknowledges like, oh, this is why this is a pain point. This is why I've felt harmed. This is why I'm just tired, right? And so we were like, what would it look like to create a space like that? So we had this vision in 2019 to do an in-person retreat for activists, community advocates of color from across the country. It was completely free, nomination, and it was a 2-day experience. And all provided by practitioners of color who could really speak to the nuances of that experience, right? Because this isn't to dismiss being able to get services from white practitioners, but there is a sensibility there that most people don't have access to. And of course, when we were supposed to launch it, this pandemic happened. We're like, all right, maybe we can't do an in-person retreat. And around that time, I'd been asked to join the board of Lululemon. And they literally called us one day and they said, we can't do in-person programming right now. We've got this budget. If we give it to you, what could you do with it? And we were like, hold please. Like, we could do a lot, you know? So our first Rebel and Rest retreat was actually virtual in the fall of 2020. We did 2 retreats, 2 days, and it was just magical. Like, one, we couldn't have planned better timing, right? Because you had all these people who were doing this work, and then it was being exacerbated by, you know, the impact of this global pandemic. And then we did one right after the 2020 election. So these, you know, lightweight experiences happening. And so over those 2 retreats, we supported over 140 activists from the US and Canada. It was 2 days of, you know, breath work, and each of them got free mental health services, and they got to meet with a mental health counselor. We did art therapy. We had a chef. We shipped them kits, and they cooked food that was, you know, around sort of rest and relaxation, and they all got shipped these wellness kits, all with products made from people, women of color particularly, plus Lululemon products, because, you know. And so that's our first program. And then our other 2 programs that we run on an annual basis, one we're about to have next week, and Fanm Djanm, we're really excited, as one of our partners, and this amazing, talented woman will be photographing our cohort. But it's called Compose, and it's a writing retreat for women of color to rest and create. And so again, we recognize that, for me, coming from a perspective of sort of policy and infrastructure, and Megan from a legal standpoint, you know, around immigration rights and voting rights, that if our stories aren't being told accurately or at all, right, that's ultimately what informs these systems.
Right.
And so when our stories are silenced, they're siloed, right, then we don't have the mechanisms in place to inform a change in policy, a change in practice, or cultural paradigm. So we were like, we need to create a space where this work that's happening on the ground, these women who are the least resourced have an opportunity to amplify their work through storytelling. So it's a 3-day retreat. We select 10 women from across the country. It's an application process. Last year was our first year. We had about 110 applicants last year. I think we were around 90 this year. Really hard to bring it down to 10, but they're brought in for 3 days. We partnered with Soho House, so they get a full 1-year global partner fellowship. So they have a place and space to work. And then they're paired with mentors that are in their area of storytelling. So that's filmmaking, that's documentary making, sort of editorial, and sort of authorship. And they're supported for a full year with mentorship. And that has just been, I mean, this is probably like my heart in like program form, where it just feels really beautiful to like invest in these voices. And we already have seen sort of what's come out of this program. We had a woman who came into the program with a film about the extraction, extortion of Hawaiian lands, right? This is a 1.5 years ago. She's from Maui, and then fast forward a year, the devastating fires in Maui, she screens her film at Soho, and they do a big fundraiser to like provide all those proceeds go back to the Maui Fund. We've had 3 other women get published for the first time, and so it's, for us, it just feels, it feels aligned in this moment. And then one program that we actually launched here in this space was the Rebel Fund. For us, that was an acknowledgement of racial justice doesn't happen without economic justice. And we can rah ourselves as much as we want, but like, we need the monies, right? And, you know, I'm sure you know this as an entrepreneur, right? Women of color, both on the venture capital side and on the philanthropic side, are the least invested in. So women of color in venture capital only receive 2%. And if you imagine whatever that percentage of the 2%, it's like zero, you know, it's like barely calculable. And so we're like, we know what it's like, the hustle of like grant writing and like going after funds and partnerships. And that in itself is a full-time job. But even more so, you think about just sort of the way in which these structures were built, right, wasn't to honor our stories. And so even if you do go through and jump through all the hoops to like tell your story and write this insanely long grant or application process, right, and you're accepted, it's usually you're being asked to kind of now tell the narrative in a way that fits their annual report. And so that their benefactors can understand it, which usually waters down the impact because it's not actually meeting the vision. And we were like, okay, what does it look like to decolonize this process where we can tell our stories from our vantage point and our language is honored and we're affirmed? And so we were really, really intentional about even the application process. Like the questions we asked, how you could submit your form. It didn't just have to be written, you could do a video. And then also, it was iterative, so that you weren't spending 12 hours of your working day on an application. Instead, we say, hey, part 1, and if you make it through that round, then you do more work, and part 2, and part 3. And so it was really special when we launched, just hearing people say, like, I have been so burnt out or traumatized from application and grant writing. This is the first application I've read where like I feel supported even in the process, right? And so we're announcing our 3 recipients in November, or it's November 1st, this month, end of this month. 3 recipients will receive $10,000 each.
Incredible.
Which, you know, we wish it was $100,000 one day, but we also recognize that like 10K can really advance someone's vision.
I mean, you started in 2019.
Exactly. We were like, let's fund ourselves. We could get $10,000 could go a long way. So that's some examples of our programs that are specifically for our community of women of color. And we run one program specifically calling in white identifying women into the work of coagitation. And so it's a 1-year program where they are invited to both learn and unlearn so that they can contribute to this work of racial justice.
How big is the Rosa Rebellion team? Because that's a lot of work. It's 3, you have 3 programs.
Yeah.
And all of it is so intentional, just kind of like the planning phase of it, right? Even the building out the application process is a time consuming.
Well, I'm reminded of how small our team is this week as we prepare for Compose. There's really no one full time except for me. And even that is probably relative, like what is full time, you know?
Right.
But we have 3 amazing team members. We have a shout out to Anita, who's our very first hire. She's our program partnership director. And then we have Jaleesa, who oversees all of our operations. And then we have Olivia, who's our brand and communication manager. And then Megan serves as co-founder in the moment. She's doing incredible work serving as a civil rights attorney for a voting rights nonpartisan nonprofit. So just doing some light work on like saving democracy and like disrupting voting, disenfranchisement. So I really wish she would do more with her life. But like, you know, what are you gonna do? So we're really excited and grateful for the work that she's doing. And so that has meant less time for Rosa Rebellion, but more time for her to hopefully make this upcoming election more equitable. So yeah, that's our team right there, the 4 of us basically. And then just amazing partners. I will say the Rebel Fund is a separate 501c3.
Okay.
So we do have a separate team that runs that, but it's just one person, Lena Martinez Wolfganger, who's our executive director, and then we have a board. But obviously our board are volunteers. And so also shout out to Shalia Fox, who is our inaugural board chair, who, I mean, Megan and I are always in awe. It's like we had a vision, but she really brought it to life.
How do you go about building a board?
Great
What
question.
does that even mean? You know?
Yeah, so I've fortunately or unfortunately had a lot of experience with that. You know, right around the early 2010s, Austin was going through this sort of experience of, we were the fastest growing city in the country that was simultaneously losing our Black population, which is just like the math isn't mathing, right? It's like we usually go where the jobs are and where the growth is. That means there's something innately not connecting. So you had people coming in for school and then leaving, right? Or coming in for their entry-level jobs at whatever tech firm or for the state and then leaving. And so there was this concerted effort of like, how do we maintain that community? And so I helped start the Urban League Young Professionals, which are, you know, sort of an auxiliary of the National Urban League. And we didn't have a chapter in Austin. And it's really funny because we were supposed to celebrate the 10-year anniversary in 2020, but obviously for obvious reasons we didn't. And so I remember I went to an Urban League gala because someone had an extra ticket, and I was like, I get to dress up, I'll be there. And the woman who won an award that day was saying how she just got back from the National Urban League conference, and she was so inspired by all these young professional chapters around the country. And I was like, oh my gosh, that'd be really cool to have here. So I went up to her afterwards. I was like, hey, I was really intrigued with what you said. She's like, let's grab lunch. And by the end of lunch, somehow I had been tasked with starting an Urban League Professional. I was like, I'm confused. I came here to ask you questions, and I left with like a job. A volunteer job. And so I was like, you know, I just moved back from college, and I grew up in very white spaces. And so I was like, like, is there like a call that I can make? It's like, Black people unite, you know, like Avengers. And so I literally sent out an email. I was working for a PR agency at the time, and I asked them, I'd only been working for 2 months. I was like, can I use the conference room on a Sunday? They're like, sure. I sent out an email to every Black person I knew, which wasn't a lot at the time, maybe like 15 that were like back in Austin, 15 people. And that Sunday, 45 people fit into a 15-person conference room. Because that many people were eager to have a space that spoke to them. And from there, I was like, okay, I'm gonna make an agenda. I'm gonna make up these positions. Who wants to run for these positions? And just kind of built it as we went. And the Urban League Young Professionals are still around today. We won Rookie Chapter of the Year that year. And it really was just a response to what the community needs. And for us, we used to say, like, when you're fresh off the boat in Austin, we were your first stop, because we wanted to like get you involved in community. Because there was times when people were like, I can go a whole day without seeing someone who looks like me. And I don't know, how does that translate to me now being a visible voice in this city and how it's built and how it's shaped? And so from there, I have since then built other boards and organizations. And so for the Rebel Fund, we knew that from the jump, the most important thing was our chair had to be just fierce. And Shalia Fox is just that, someone who has the ability to translate vision to manifestation, right?
Yes.
And also she also helped build the Austin Black Fund, which is $1 million fund that was just launched last year. So she also had this keen sensibility of what it means to build something that is uniquely for us and by us. You know, Rosa Rebellion, ours is more culturally expansive because it's for BIPOC communities at large. So that was the first thing, is making sure that the person anchoring this vision had that experience, but also that passion, because it's volunteer work. And then the second piece was attracting women to the board who we knew had an innate connection to that story, and brought their unique resources. I think a lot of the ways that other nonprofit boards and for-profit boards they start with, well, who can bring us money, right? Obviously, yes, money is important, but there are other resources, right, besides money that are important to keep a vision moving. Yeah. And so for us, it was important that we had like multi-generational representation on our board, right? That it wasn't just a bunch of millennials, although we're amazing, right? Right. That so we have 2 folks on our board that would consider themselves baby boomers, right? And then it was also important for us to make sure that we didn't have blind spots, right? So it would have been really easy for us to just bring a bunch of people who were like advocates and activists and worked in this like specific space of racial justice. We're like, no, we need folks who work in media and branding. We need folks who have experience in law. We need people who have experience in sort of retail, right? Because it brought the varied voices and experience to the table. And so we've been really grateful for this group of women that we've been able to coerce, I'm just kidding, invite into this vision with us.
What advice would you give to someone who's interested in starting something like what you've started, what you and Megan started?
I'm gonna say I think the most important advice I can offer someone is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. I don't think I've been able to build or do anything that wasn't grounded in community. And I think one of the pitfalls sometimes is when we're so convinced of our vision that we fail to like expand our periphery to see, well, who else is in this space? How can what I bring elevate what they're doing and vice versa? And like there's no reason to like and reinvent the wheel and be in competition for what? Like there's only so many resources to go around. And so we stretch those resources when we can collaborate and partner. And so I think the biggest thing is like never to do anything in isolation. Like from the get-go, like we wouldn't have launched at South by without like 12 different partnerships. Right? And so, I mean, I think that's really the only way we've been able to sustain, because it's not like we're bringing in millions of dollars. It's not like we have a massive team. It's really been leaning on community where they trust our mission and vision and we trust what they build as well.
I like what you said about collaboration. You said, you took it in words. You said, how can I elevate what this person is doing? And I want to talk about collaboration from this perspective with you, because I am a huge believer in collaboration. Same, I wouldn't have been able to grow my company without collaborating or reaching out to people, even when I was nervous. But I think there are ways to go about it. How do you approach people to collaborate? And I'm sure it's all different, but what are the key things you think about? Because I think younger people might benefit from some of your advice.
Well, I want to appreciate the
Although
question.
we're still so young.
Yeah, I know. So young, so young. I had like a dagger in the heart. Our new brand manager. I mean, I knew she was young, but like, you know, we didn't ask for like a birth certificate when we hired her.
Right.
And I was booking her flight to come in for Compose, and it said 99.
Oh my.
And I literally, like, we were texting on like our, what do you call that? Like project management tool. So she could like see the bubble, and she was like, "Did you get it?" And I was like, "I need a second. I need a second." And she was like, and then she was like, "LOL, I honestly felt really uncomfortable when I sent that to you." I was like, "That makes it worse, because you knew that I would feel some type of way." And she goes, "At least it's got a 9, like at least it doesn't have a 2. And I was like, "I literally can't." She said, "At least I'm still born in the 1900s.
Right.
And I was like, "I need a minute. Stop talking to me." Anyway, but we are still young, okay?
Right, very.
Anyways, so yes, I mean, I think there's varied levels of collaboration, right? And I do, maybe it's semantics, but I do see a difference between collaboration and partnership. For me, partnership is when I have a sense that this entity, platform, brand, right, is in a position in which they should be utilizing their resources to invest in community, right? And I feel like we could be a conduit for how they invest in community, right? That to me is partnership, because there's reciprocity, right? But we're usually leaning on either their financial capital or their community reach, Versus collaboration is when I feel like we're peers, right? We're working in similar spaces. We have similar communities or audiences, and we want to amplify what each of us does in collective. So again, that could be semantics, but that's how I think about it. But I say that because I think the approach differs.
Yes.
Right? I often find when I'm going after a partnership, right, I'm like in the weeds. This is the biggest thing I'll say. First of all, do your research.
Yes.
Right? Do not copy and paste emails to every brand organization, right? Because you're trying to tell a story, and ultimately what you're asking is, hey, will you be a part of our story, or will you be a part of amplifying our story? So you need to know what their story is, right? So for me, that starts from the moment I'm like, cool, like you can take any big brand, right? You're like, oh, it's just Lululemon. Oh, it's just Bumble. Oh, it's just whatever. Everyone knows what they do. It's like, yeah, but why do you see a need to leverage what they do? So I'm like, hey, in 2017, you said this in this article, extract, and that aligns specifically with what we do in this program. We can help you bring that to life. I'm that specific and nuanced, right? And to me, that's around making sure that it's not transactional, but it's actually relational, right? Where I'm saying like, hey, don't just write us a check. How can you be a part of the work that we do, and how can we help you express what you say is a part of your mission and vision? And that to me, creates more long-term, sustained relationships rather than, well, we did this one thing one time with that entity. And then I think collaboration is when you've built that from the beginning off of relationship, right? You've shown up to that organization, that brand's programming. You've seen what it looks like in real time, and you feel an innate connection that your visions and missions can honor one another.
Right.
And for me, that collaboration happens, right, with brands and organizations where you feel like there's a heart connection.
Yeah.
And then it feels less of an ask because, the moments I felt that is when you send an email or you jump on that Zoom and there's no pitch deck.
Right.
There's no 10-point plan and outcome. It's like, say less.
Right.
When do you want to do it? What's the date? You want to jump in on this thing we're doing because you're like, I already get you already get me, and we've built a relationship, and I already know how you're moving in this world. And for me, that is foundationally relational. And I think for us, that's the only way we know how to move. And I would encourage anyone who's building something, right, to really think about the story you're telling and to really think about the relationships you want to build. Because it's great to get a check, but if that check is not sustainable in terms of relationship, I think you limit what's possible.
Yeah.
And you also, I think it's better to build trust than it is to build, case studies. I don't know if that was helpful.
That was helpful. You're telling people to do their research, to be very specific when they're reaching out, to know the difference between what's a partnership and what's a collaboration. All of that is important because some people don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't even know what they do and how they can
articulate it.
How they can come together with they don't understand what value they would provide.
And I think that's a huge piece of it, right? Like before you reach out, what is, hopefully you've got a vision and mission, but even in your ask, knowing what your story is as well as their story. Because I think sometimes they'll be like, well, I'm putting on this event. What else is there I need to say? It's like, okay, well, like, how does this event fit into the larger conversation? And how will this grow? Or what is the long-term impact, right? Or even short-term impact of this event? Is it just a gathering space? Because there's value in that, but I need to know, right? Or is this about bridging a gap, or is it about disrupting a current experience? And so knowing what the value and vision is, I think is really important.
Absolutely. Outside of Rosa Rebellion, what are you into?
Ooh.
as a Black woman living in Austin?
Living in Austin, very specific as a Black woman living in Austin. What am I into? There's a few things that I think kind of just, I've been having this conversation, shout out to my therapist, I've been having this conversation of late about distinguishing work, right, with what actually fills me as Virginia, because I think for a lot of my adult life, because I came into kind of leadership and community spaces early on in my 20s, that I was like, oh no, this is how I have fun, and then realizing like, well, there's also an ask in this experience, right? You're showing up and yeah, it's fun, but so for me, I've been like really trying to invest in like what gives me reprieve and joy outside of my work. And so a few things that I've discovered is one, I think I went into quarantine life and I spent most of my life kind of responding to what people thought of me, which was that I was an extrovert. Because I think of how I usually, express myself and the work that I do, that like I just must love being around people at all times, and I'm just like love to be out and about. And what I have probably always known, but maybe didn't take the time to hear my own truth, was that like, one, I think I'm an ambivert, and two, I like purposeful gathering. Like, I don't need to just be out here to be out here.
Right.
Like, I want to be out in these streets. I'm just kidding. I want to be out in community when I'm showing up to support something intentional. I love to gather people. I love to host,
You're
right?
a good host.
Thank you. And that fills me up. Like, when there's that intention, that does fill me up. It doesn't feel draining, it feels energizing. But I also enjoy solitude, and I also enjoy just being in my own thoughts and being at rest. And I holistically have struggled with what it looks like to be at rest. And so now I feel like I've discovered that, like, rest for me is working out. Like, sure, there's physical benefits for it, but for me, it is a mental game. Like, if I'm not running that day, then I'm at least going on a walk, right? That for me is also the only time that I can get my brain to turn off. And so that gives me joy and that gives me rest. I think the other piece is, as a storyteller, I also love absorbing stories. So I'm a big documentary watcher, and an art that I've gotten back to is like, sure, there's podcasts and books, but I used to be a voracious magazine reader. Like, I was the girl. First of all, I'm gonna tell y'all a little bit about my trauma and my pettiness. I always thought I was gonna be the very first Black editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue. We all know who took that position.
Right. Yes.
She did great. She did great. But that was my dream.
Yes.
Growing up. Because my mom was a big, this is pre-Instagram, pre-social media. So my mom's version of that was magazines. So we had a subscription to Martha Stewart, which she read like the Bible, Essence, Ebony, like Oprah magazine. And so I would steal my mom's magazines, and that's how I really started, like, that's why I think aesthetics, people are always like, oh, you do this work and that must be so hard and draining, but and like they have trouble like connecting those two parts of me, of like enjoying the expression of clothes and whatnot. And I'm like, clothes are a story. I'm literally telling a story.
Yes.
And because my work can feel heavy and daunting at times, sometimes a story is like, y'all ain't gonna kill me today. I'm gonna wear silver metallic pants, right? And reflect all of those things. But anyway, it's really how I think I started to spark my curiosity. And so I would literally get like the Teen Vogue in the mail at the beginning of the week, and it'd be wrapped in plastic, and I would wait to look at it all week. But I'm like, can't wait to get home after school on Friday. And everyone knew Friday, before I like hung out with friends or watched the movie that me and my siblings rented, I'd go to my room and put on music, unwrap the Teen Vogue, and just read it every single page.
How special.
It was just so exciting. And And then, I think as like magazines started to die, when I went to college, I just became a big blog reader. But I was like, so last year I was like, I miss the art of magazines. So I went and like got a bunch of subscriptions, and now I've gone back to like reading my magazines page by page. And there's this different sense of inspiration that I don't think I get on like Instagram or on the news or whatnot. So those are some of the things I think are feeding me. And then
I'm a big print person.
And it's just like there's nothing that replicates it, I think. Like this doesn't do it.
Everything is just so fast.
Yes.
And with a magazine or a book, you can just truly slow down. Like you can just take your time.
Absolutely.
To read line by line, to really look at the picture.
Yeah.
No pinching involved.
There's
just like you see it.
I think you're right. I think it is around time. It forces you to slow down, and I also think that it's very rare that we spend time really contemplating something we see on social media. Like, I read it, I put it in the save box, and I'm on to the next.
Yeah.
Whereas like when I'm reading a magazine, it's like I went back, I took my pen, I highlighted it, I folded it, I sat there, because I control when the next page turns. And so, yeah, it's been a really welcomed small interruption.
As someone who's always been into magazines, and I'm sure you read them now, have you noticed a difference in the way writers, editors write, or the stories they tell? What would you say is...
For sure. Well, unfortunately, just the written word is a dying breed, so there's so many ads now, which is super annoying.
Yes.
And you also notice that a lot of even the articles are actually tailored to their, ad quota. So you're like, oh my gosh, this is such a cool article about, I don't know, whoever, Tracy Ellis Ross or whatever. And then you realize like, oh, it's a sponsored article. So it's like, this is still a cool article, but I wonder how much of this is intentional versus like what they were part of the parameters. So that's a bummer. And then I think also a lot of magazines are doing print, but they're doing print every other month, and then they're doing digital. And the digital is a little bit more like short term, or they're not long form.
Right.
So I think sometimes you feel like you're missing out on that in the print edition, because they can't be as responsive because it's like 60 days in between.
Right.
So the stories don't feel like as fresh or as relevant. I do think on a positive side, and because I still, be flicking through Teen Vogue every once in a while, see what's going on up there. And actually, one of our mentors for Compose is the former editor for Teen Vogue. She took over after Elaine. But I feel like there's been more investment and intentionality of exploring the intersections of these conversations. That it's, so even like an Elle, right, or Harper Bazaar, or a Vogue, it's like, yeah, we're talking about trends and fashion, but we're also talking about how this is translating into these conversations about political paradigms and around culture. And so there's been that expansion, and then I think we've also seen an expansion of the type of voices who are being given authorship for these magazines, which is exciting. Not to say that it's where it needs to be, but definitely a shift from when I was growing up, where it's like if I wanted to go read an article written by and for women of color, I had to go to Essence or Ebony. Or I think that might be the end of it. I think that's the list. So yeah, I think those are maybe some of the observations I've made over the past year.
So when we talk about storytelling as activism, right? Who are your heroes? When we think, I mean, it's broad, right? So who do you think of first? Give me
the
three.
Top, like off the dome, top three: James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, and who's gonna get that third spot?
Because there's so many.
Hard. There's many. It's a toss-up after that around, maybe Angela Davis. But I'll put someone like a contemporary voice in there. Shout out to Cole Arthur Riley, who is the founder of Black Liturgy, if you follow her on Instagram. And I would say out of our generation, she's the most reminiscent of just like prophetic, viscerally beautiful words that speak to where we are as a collective. And I think that's what draws me to the words and work of like James Baldwin and Audre Lorde is like, today, like I was like, I'm gonna post something, and these are words written by James Baldwin in like 1957 that speak to me and speak to us in this moment of time, like that accurately.
Right.
And so for me, I find like the most powerful voices for me are usually artists, right? Because that's what writers are. That's what artists do. Is they are the documenters of our time, and therefore they kind of have this like ability to sit above, not from like a patronizing way, but sit above and be the observers while other people have to be in the minutia, right? So like, I think that's probably why if you were to ask me like who my inspirations and inspirations or sort of precedents are, they're probably not political figures. There's a lot of political figures that I admire.
Right.
But in terms of, because they're in the weeds of like system change, and which is powerful and needed. But for me, there's something to be said about the folks who can like observe the patterns and provide language to articulate that. And so, yeah, if you don't already follow Black Liturgies, I would encourage you to do so. I think I literally, when I am despondent and like, what even is the point, you know, which many of us maybe have had over the past couple of weeks, years, you know, I say I'm on about a 3-month time frame where it's like every 3 months I question my entire life, where I'm like, why? What are we doing? We're not making seismic change. Is this a vanity project? Nothing I do matters. Like literally all of those things, because it feels like, okay, cool, we did this program and this effort, but that doesn't keep someone from going to a grocery store on a Sunday afternoon and shooting up a community grocery store in Buffalo.
Right.
Cool, we did this, we're investing in people's visions, but that doesn't stop, you know, bombing happening across the world, right? That's birthed out of colonialism. And so I feel like when I need the energy and sort of the ability to figure out why we persist, it's usually those voices. And so, yeah, I would say Audre Lorde, James Baldwin, and Cole Arthur Riley are kind of my go-to in this season of life.
Okay. Yeah. So we have to start wrapping up now, but we always ask this question. It's very important.
I'm nervous and excited.
Yes. What is your relationship to your hair?
You saved the hardest for last. I will say my relationship to my hair right now is great. First of all, I don't believe God makes mistakes, but I do believe sometimes you gotta help him out every once in a while. And I think I was born to be a redhead.
It suits you.
And you know, I just had the guts to do it when did I do it? March. And I'm like, imagine where I could be in life if I had decided to become a redhead earlier. And my mom's a natural redhead, and my aunts and uncles are, so I've always been super salty that it didn't pass down. They're like red hair, freckle, and I was just like, this feels unfair, you know, like, sure, you passed on some good traits, but that felt like, so right now I'm feeling like very inspired with my hair journey. Yes. I feel like, because it was a real risk for me, and there's certain things where I feel like I'm very expressive in my clothes and whatnot, but like my hair and other things where I'm like, I was more like, I don't want to ruin my hair, and you know, so yeah, right now my relationship is feeling very joyful. Like I love that I chose this journey for me. My hair hasn't fallen out, so that's a good sign.
Yeah.
I think, you know, not to be a generalist, but I think like a lot of Black girls growing up as millennials specifically, I've had a complex relationship with my hair. But I credit my mother for being really intentional with how she chose to style our hair, what she exposed us to, and the language she gave us, because for context, I was the only Black kid in my grade, kindergarten through 6th grade. And like I have vivid memories of like, you know, when you do like you get to watch a movie or something, you do like the train line, so you do the person's hair in front of you. And like I have a vivid memory of in like 3rd grade being so excited because we were gonna watch like Sound of Music or something. And I don't think my hair was just like in a ponytail. And you know, my mom, like a good mother, had oiled my hair that morning. And you know, some girl who was behind me just screamed, "Ew, your hair's dirty," and promptly told me I needed to get to the back of the line. And it was just like this, you know, like obviously I knew my hair was different, whatever. And 3rd grade, the next year, I remember begging my mother to get, don't laugh, a Jerry curl.
No.
I wanted like wash and go hair that I could just swim in. You know, in the summers, I was like, oh, my friends, I don't want to have to like come home and blow dry it and da 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 da. And my mom was like, you don't want to do this. You're gonna regret it. I'm like, no, Mom, I'm gonna love it.
Right.
And she let me get a Jerry curl, or like, you know, we call it Jerry curl, but it was just like an enhanced texture enhancer or whatever. And because I wanted that wash and go sort of whatever. And then of course I went through my journey of like relaxing. And that was probably more because I was an athlete, played sports through college, and that felt like the easiest. And then probably in college, a combination of like just wanting to do something different. I cut off all my hair my senior year. I got the like Rihanna pixie cut of the time, like the swoosh.
Yeah, iconic stuff.
And that felt like a grown-up moment for me because I was interning in DC, and so I already thought I was like the coolest. And I was like, I'm gonna cut off all my hair, and no one will be able to tell me nothing. Like Rihanna and I are twins.
Yeah, clearly.
Same birthday month, both from Barbados. Like, and from there is when I started like my natural hair journey. So now it's been like, well, not to age myself, but a long time. And I think since then, I've had a really good relationship with my hair. Like, have loved, I mean, this isn't my natural, you know, I pin curled this, but love my natural curl pattern and texture. And I've also kind of rejected even this like categorization. I'm like, I have 4C, I have 4A, I have C3Z.5, and just
you
been
don't
like,
have to use the type.
Yeah,
I stopped.
you know, where
Everyone
I'm just
sees
kind of,
it.
where
Right.
I'm just kind of like, this is my hair, and I found the products and the practices that work for me. Because I think that even, which was supposed to be sort of this idea of like, now everyone has information about their hair, and it became this, what's the word, kind of marginalization even within the natural hair journey.
That's a whole other conversation.
A whole other conversation where people were like manipulating their hair so they could say this was their natural curl pattern, and you know. So for me, I have felt really freed in my journey over the past 10 plus years, and I think in this very year when I decided to change my color, I'm feeling excited about it.
I think we will start making progress when we stop getting frustrated with our shrinkage. Like,
That part.
It is okay.
Yes.
You don't need to pull to show people how long your hair is
can
or
be.
can get. It's fine.
And you know,
And we all, including myself, have
struggled with
with that. But I was thinking
Absolutely.
about that recently because my current hairstyle, my favorite thing to do is to pat it down versus stretch it out.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is a good stage of my life for me in terms of like thinking about my hair journey. I love that I prefer to pat it now.
Yeah, then
Because, right.
and I think, you know, obviously that's influence of, you know, Eurocentric beauty and all of that, but I also feel like it has limited our ability to celebrate what our hair does.
Yes.
Right? Because the whole, you know, even the natural hair journey, it was like, first it was like, yes, cut it off, be free. But then 2-strand twist it, put it up in a pineapple and stretch it as much as possible. And then
get all these
it's like, well, then,
products.
like, what is that natural? Or is like, you know,
Right.
I mean, I will admit, like, this is 4-day hair. I washed
Right.
it in time for a wedding.
Right.
And I was like annoyed on Saturday for the ceremony because I was like, oh, my curls haven't stretched like I'd like them to. But then Sunday I was like,
Yes.
we got that full
Popping.
stretch, right? And that's just, you know, I don't necessarily chalk it up to like, I don't think my hair is pretty when it's not, but
Right.
that's how I wanted it styled that day. But I do
Right.
think that we have undermined a little bit of the initial impetus for like
Right.
natural hair. And I also, you know, it's been interesting, and I'm curious, I know we don't have time today, maybe how your hair journey or your relationship to your hair has changed since becoming a mother, and particularly
Yes.
having a daughter.
That's the whole conversation.
Yeah, because
we
I've
should
noticed
actually
that
do another sit down
around that, because I've noticed that with my mother, because my mother's very fair skinned, she has red hair, but her hair texture is very tight, and a lot tighter than mine. And so she talks about, in comparison to her siblings, who have very naturally coily, curly hair. And so that distinguishment in her hair
Right.
journey. So yeah, it's just, there's so many layers
Such
to
a
it, and
great
it's so
conversation.
generational, I feel like.
Absolutely.
So, but yes, joy is how I would describe my current moment with my
Great.
hair.
I love that for you.
Thank you. And I love your hair. It gives me joy to see your hair right
Thank
now.
you. It gives me joy. It really does. I love this new haircut. On that note, we have reached the end. Thank you for tuning in to Rabbit Wednesday. I had such a wonderful
Thank you.
conversation with you. It's always an honor to sit in your presence. You make me want to sit a little taller when I hang out around you.
Well, I
So-
mean, physically, I always feel taller when I'm in your presence, but this is truly an honor just to be in conversation with you, and I'm really grateful to witness the way in which you build spaces and build community. So thanks for having me.
Same. We see each other.
We see each other.
It's a wrap. That's a wrap on another incredible episode of Rabbit Wednesday. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss out on other inspiring conversations and head wrap tutorials. See you soon.